G and walked with calm purpose toward the hardened shelter where the F-22 sat like a coiled predator. And someone tried to stop her, telling her again to take off the uniform, that this wasn't funny anymore. And she finally turned, met his eyes, and said softly that if he had a problem, he could take it up with the Air Force Chief of Staff after the flight. And when the shelter doors slid open and the Raptor emerged, sunlight sliding over its angular skin, the noise of the camp fell away, replaced by a deep, expectant silence broken only by the whine of systems coming alive. And Alana climbed the ladder with the ease of someone who had done this not once or twice, but hundreds of times. Every movement precise, every check deliberate. And as she sealed the canopy, she thought of her mother working double shifts, of her grandmother telling her to stand tall, no matter who tried to shrink her, of every person who had mistaken her calm for weakness. And then the engine spooled, and the air itself seemed to tense. And when the jet rolled onto the runway and paused, the colonel felt a flicker of doubt for the first time, a small crack in certainty, because the posture of that aircraft, the way it waited, felt different. And when Alana pushed the throttles forward, the Raptor leapt as if freed from gravity's argument, climbing almost vertically, leaving behind a thunderclap that slammed into chests and silenced every skeptic. And what followed wasn't just a flight, but a declaration, a choreography of speed and control that rewrote assumptions in real time as she executed maneuvers so tight and clean they looked impossible, snapping turns that painted invisible lines across the sky, accelerating past the sound barrier with a precision that spoke of intimate understanding between pilot and machine. And as the jet vanished and reappeared, high then low, fast then impossibly slow, the camp watched not a stunt but mastery, the kind that can't be faked or granted by favoritism. And radios crackled with stunned commentary from observers who had never seen the envelope pushed so confidently. And when she simulated an engagement profile that outperformed every benchmark the camp had trained for, the colonel felt something heavier than embarrassment settle in his chest, because he realized this wasn't a lesson aimed only at him, but at the entire culture he represented. And when the Raptor returned, touching down with deceptive gentleness, rolling to a stop as if nothing extraordinary had just happened, Alana powered down and sat for a moment in the quiet cockpit, letting the adrenaline fade, knowing the hardest part wasn't the flight, but the aftermath. And when she climbed down the ladder, helmets came off around her, eyes met hers with a mix of awe and recalibration, and the colonel approached, his voice measured now, asking why he hadn't been informed. And she handed him the sealed orders, watched his face change as he read, watched authority realign itself with reality. And she told him calmly that she was there to evaluate not just aircraft readiness, but command judgment under pressure, and that today's results would be forwarded unchanged. And the silence that followed was different from before, heavier, thoughtful. And over the next hours as the camp adjusted, pilots approached her, not with jokes but with questions, wanting to understand how she flew the way she did, how she read the jet. And she shared what she always had: discipline, preparation, respect for the machine, never once mentioning the insults, because she didn't need to. And the twist that few expected came later that night when an emergency scramble was called for a real-world, unidentified contact. And without hesitation, Alana was the one cleared to launch. And this time, no one questioned it as she took off into the dark, intercepted the contact with textbook precision, and returned with confirmation that avoided an international incident. And by morning, her name was on every secure briefing, not as a controversy but as a standard. And when the colonel addressed the camp, he didn't apologize publicly, but he acknowledged the lesson. And for Alana, that was enough, because she knew change didn't always come with speeches, but with undeniable proof. And weeks later, when footage of that flight circulated through official channels, inspiring kids watching from fences and windows just like she once had, she thought back to the words they'd thrown at her that morning, telling her to take off her uniform. And she smiled, because she had worn it into the sky and rewritten what it meant. And if you're still here listening to this story, remember this moment the next time someone decides who belongs before you even speak. Because sometimes the answer doesn't come as an argument, but as a roar overhead. And that's why you subscribed, because these are the stories that remind us what's possible. If you're watching this from anywhere in the United States, and you believe in stories where doubt gets crushed at Mach speed, hit subscribe right now, because this is one story YouTube didn't want you to hear. The moment they told a black woman to take off her uniform, laughed her out of a restricted zone, and then watched in stunned silence as an F-22 Raptor tore the sky open over their camp, changing every life on that base forever. And it began on a heat-shimmering morning when Captain Alana Brooks stepped onto the edge of the desert airfield wearing a flight suit that looked too new for the dust, too clean for a place that smelled of jet fuel and old grudges, a place where tradition had hardened into something sharp and unwelcoming. And when she presented her orders to the temporary command staff running the joint exercise, the colonel barely glanced at the paper before his eyes flicked up, paused and hardened, not because the orders were unclear, but because her presence disrupted a story he'd already decided was true, and with a half smile that wasn't friendly, he said loud enough for the surrounding pilots and crew chiefs to hear that there must have been some mistake, that this was a restricted fighter integration camp, that uniforms like hers belonged on transport decks or briefing rooms, not anywhere near the crown jewel of American air dominance. And when she calmly repeated her name, rank, and call sign, the laughter came in pieces like static. Snorts, muttered comments, a loud voice saying she should take off the uniform before she embarrassed herself further. And in that moment, Alana felt the familiar burn, the same one she'd felt as a cadet when an instructor assumed she was lost, the same one she'd swallowed during flight school when another student suggested she'd only made it through because someone wanted a brochure photo, and she let it pass through her like turbulence, because she knew something they didn't, something she'd carried quietly since she was a kid, watching jets claw into the sky from the fence line near her grandmother's house, memorizing silhouettes, learning engines by sound, promising herself she would master the air not to prove them wrong, but because it was the only place she ever felt truly free. And so she stood there as the colonel dismissed her, told her to wait near the hangars, told her someone would sort out the paperwork, and when she walked away, she heard someone say it outright, clear and sharp, that she didn't belong, that this was a man's jet, a real jet, not a diversity experiment. And the words stung, but they didn't slow her steps, because in her pocket was a second set of orders signed higher than the colonel's authority, orders that placed her here not as a visitor, but as the lead evaluator for a classified readiness demonstration. And while the camp went on with its day, briefings, pre-flights, confident voices trading war stories, Alana sat alone on a folding chair by the tarmac, watching heat waves dance under the sun, replaying every obstacle that had brought her here. From the scholarship committee that questioned her background to the evaluator who once said she flew too smooth to be aggressive, a coded insult she'd learned to translate. And hours later, when the base loudspeakers crackled to life announcing an unscheduled live flight demonstration, confusion rippled through the camp because no one on the roster was cleared for it, and the colonel's jaw tightened as he demanded answers. And then the same voice continued, stating that the demonstration would be conducted immediately by Captain Alana Brooks, call sign Valkyrie, and heads turned in disbelief as she stood, zipped her helmet bag, and walked with calm purpose toward